So the one thing I at least thought was a bit weird was when I was reading the chapter, it wasn't like very, he didn't get to the, like, at least for me, the examples of method versus generic until this kind of second half of the chapter. And it didn't make sense to me until I actually gave the example of like trying to make subclasses. And I was like, oh, methods versus generics, I get that now. Like that was at least for me. So I kind of started with like reminding of the definitions. Yeah, I guess I'll start. Yeah. Okay. Sweet. Okay. So when we're making objects in S3, we create a new S3 object first with just this kind of call to structure and giving an object a class. And that's kind of it for creating an S3 object. You just give it the class attribute and bam, it's an S3 object. So I started with a really simple S3 object in the kind of constructor style that he recommended, which is that for your constructor, you want it very, very basic because no one is really ever going to see it besides you probably, and you're going to make a helper function for somebody else to actually interact with. So here's our very bare bones constructor for our new classy boy object. So what it does is it takes in the double and it takes in this extra attribute calls close. It checks the attributes are of the right class, so double character. And then we make it just by calling structure. X class is boy and close is now close. So that's how we make an S3 object. Easy. Generic functions are functions like mean and summary, which work on different data types. And methods are the precise implementations summary works on in these different objects. So there's the way it works in numerics versus data frames. And then I just gave this kind of example with the Palmer penguins, right? I think this is very similar to what you did last week, right? You call summary on characters versus numerics versus data frames, and you get these kind of different like results. And the reason behind that is the idea of the method and the method dispatch. So we can check out how method dispatch works using slope S3 dispatch. And so we've made our new fancy boy object, which is a new classy boy, 4 socks, and let's try and print it. So by default, R is going to use the default print method, which because it doesn't know how to do a print boy method, nobody's ever written a print boy method, it prints this kind of ugly blah, which in this case is the base object and then the attributes, and what's inside of it. So that's kind of ugly. So let's try and make a better print method for our classy boy. So we make our object as before, and we make a method pretty much as we talked about last week, just by adding print dot whatever the class is. So my class here was boy, and to make a print boy, I go print dot boy. We're going to get the close attribute, this attribute x close, and we'll say print using the glue function. And now when we call sloop dispatch on my fancy boy, it's going to actually run the print boy method that we've now determined. So now instead of printing that kind of like gobbledygook, we get a method that goes, ooh, I have 4 socks. So fancy. So this was kind of like this, it wasn't until I went through that exercise at least that I got the difference between a method and a generic and how S3 works with objects at all. That's why I'm kind of starting with this explanation, because it wasn't until I did that that I was like, oh, that's what the heck those two things are. Okay. So then what I'm going to do is just kind of go through exercise 3.5, exercise 2, and I'm just going to do it as basically how I worked through the problem, because I think this kind of helps us understand a bit about the ideas of attributes and methods and making new constructor objects. So the exercise was, how would we make a constructor object for the LM objects? So LM objects are linear models. And when we're thinking about making new constructors, the first kind of questions we want to ask ourselves are, what are the attributes that are currently inside the LM objects? So we can get the attributes with the attributes call on LM. And again, it's just the penguins data set. If I did a linear regression, body mass by build depth, we can see that the attributes under names are all of these ones here, and the class is LM. Okay, so that's our first kind of step towards how are we going to make our brand new constructor for a linear model. We can then actually do, of course, the help function. So this is just showing you when you do question mark LM, kind of have to scroll a little bit down through the help, but it tells you the return values. It tells you that you get a class of LM, and then it tells you all of those names, what they actually should be. So coefficients should be a name vector, residuals, numbers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I won't go through each kind of one. And then again, when we're making our new constructor, there are the very simple rules of how to make a constructor. We should call it new underscore my class for simplicity's sake. We should have an argument for the base type and one for each attribute. And we should check that each of the types that we're putting in are the right type. And beyond that, we don't want to do anything else because we're going to make more complicated functions somewhere else. So my little new LM function takes in all of these main attributes, does the stop if not, checks all of the types. I won't go through each and every one, but that. And then again, we're making a structure, and LMs are lists. I said that before, but LM object is the list class type. So we make a list, all of the correct things, and we give them a class. And again, it felt complicated to me last week, but now going through it a couple more times, I'm starting to see the simplicity of how S3 objects are working. So now we get to the idea that is, I think, really cool about object-oriented programming in general and why people tend to like it, is the idea of object inheritances and subclasses and superclasses. So S3 classes will actually allow you to share behavior through the ideas of inheritance. So in S3, we have superclasses and subclasses. And as a very simple example, there's this object called an ordered factor in R. And we can create an ordered factor using just the call ordered and then whatever we want to call it in. And if we check out the class of our little unnamed ordered factor, we can see that he has two classes. He has the ordered class and he also has the factor class. So here the factor class is the superclass and the subclass is ordered. So in other object-oriented programming languages and in maybe the other object-oriented versions of R, there are more checks on this. As he says, I think in this chapter, R will let you shoot yourself in the foot. So be careful. Be reasonable when you're making sub and super classes. As a kind of simple rule of thumb, you should have the base types be the same. So if one base type is a number, the subclass should also be a number. Don't have it be like, oh, I've created one object, which is potatoes, and that's number. And now I've created a new object, which is called fruit, and that's a character. You can do that, but it's a bad idea. And the attributes of the subclass should be a superset of the attributes of the superclass. So the idea is that a subclass is a more specific version of a superclass. So when R is trying to figure out what method to apply, so when it's going through, okay, now you've given me an object to a generic function, and I'm going to figure out which method of that generic I'm going to apply to this object. It will use something called, method dispatch. And I think we talked about this last week too. You can look through that with using this loop function S3 dispatch. And what you see here basically is, okay, so we're printing our ordered factor X. We have a default print, we have a factor print, and then we have a print ordered. So this is basically telling you that it stopped and used the print factor for printing X. Method can also delegate work using the next method call. And S3 dispatch is going to report the delegation that it used using the little bracket arrow thing. So for example, if we try to say ordered X1 and now we're going to index into it using the bracket function, we see that this is what we're returning, but this is what we're actually using. So we're using the internal method, but what we're going to return back to you is still a factor. So this was a little bit confusing to me, but as a kind of toy example he presents in the book, we're going to make a new object called a secret. And what this secret is going to do is you're going to input it any number of characters, and it's going to hide those with a bunch of X's, because maybe, I don't know, you want to store bank account information or credit cards is an example of what you might do with this. So again, constructor, check that everything is the right thing, structure, class, secret. Create a print method. So our print method is going to print a repetition of X for the number of characters of X, and then invisible is just kind of returning nothing. It's useful for creating print methods. We create our new secret, and then we print it, and we get X, 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 X. Cool, that works fine. What if we want to index into X? So now instead of wanting to print, what we're going to do is we're going to index into the first item of X. Okay, we index into the first item of X. Oh, crap, that's showing 15. That's not what we wanted. We wanted to keep that hidden. So why is that happening? Let's try and make a better way to index. So one thing we can do is we can just create a new indexing method. Using the backticks, we can do bracket.secret is a function which takes an X in the index we want to index into, we unclass it, we select index I, and then we make that back into a secret object again. Okay, that's one way to do it, but it's kind of inefficient because we're making a copy of X, which might not be a problem with this very tiny toy example, but if we were doing that thousands of times a second or across a huge data set, or if X was like a massive, massive object and we were trying to copy that, that could be problematic. So we can use the next method, which will delegate to the next method. So basically what this does, from my understanding, is we're going to call next method here, new secret, next method. And this will, rather than using the bracket secret method, it will bracket us down into internal, which will return the object. And then we'll create a new secret class back, which is what gets printed and presented. Here, the actual work of the indexing gets done by the internal, and we're creating a new secret object again, and we're not creating a wasted copy of X. So that was, I still don't think I totally understand the concept of this, if I'm entirely honest, but.
How did it look again before we had this method? So when it was still. What would the method dispatch look here like?
Here, I think it would stop on dot secret, but let's just double check. Sorry. S3 dispatch X1. So it'll go to dot secret and dot internal, but I wonder if that's because I already had everything. Yeah, it's because I already had everything cleared out.
Yeah, because then it was, it didn't go to the internal, right? And it would just do the.
I think it just does default. I think so.
And default doesn't know what this class is, and that's why it gives you the number.
Yes. Where did my thing go? Oop. Yeah, so I think that just strips away the class attribute from it. And so it's going to give you the default, I think.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand what the internal actually does. I was a bit confused there.
I think the internal methods are the ones which are relying on C, I think. I think he says that. Okay, so now let's make some subclasses. So this is where I got stuck just earlier, and it's because I forgot a comma. So let's make a subclass. If we want to allow for subclassing in our objects, it's fairly simple to do. What we have to have is our parent constructor needs to allow for the ... dots, which allows you to pass function arguments down to another internal function, and it needs to have a class argument. So I'm going to make a new parent constructor, which is going to be new classy boy, which is going to look exactly like the one before, but the only difference is now we have class as a character and we have ... So we're going to do our checks again for sanity, and we're going to pass our ... to the structure call. Now we're going to make a subclass of classy boy, and this is going to be super classy boy. And what this is going to do is it's going to take in also x, also close, and now a new function, a new argument called repetitions. And we're going to basically call inside of this a call to the parent object. So inside of new super classy boy, we call a new classy boy, x, close, and here we assign our class, which is our new subclass. So class, we call him super classy boy. And we also pass on the repetitions here. And this will get passed down here, here, into the new call to structure to make our subclass. We then have our defined print methods, print boy, repeats this, whereas super classy boy is going to repeat it as many times as you fed in repetition. So it's exactly like a boy class, but now he's super excited, so he's going to repeat it a bunch of times. So we make my fancy boy, who is a new classy boy, who has 4 socks, and an even fancier boy, who is a new super classy boy, who has 13 hats, who wants to tell you 3 times. So when we print my fancy boy, we have, I kind of messed it up. It should say, I have 4 socks, ooh, so fancy. And my even fancier boy will say, I have 13 hats 3 times. So it's relatively easy to do. In S3, it's very flexible, and there's exactly 0 checks to stop you from doing something stupid. So that's, I think, why Hadley recommends it, because it's easy, but at the same time, why you should have, a sense of caution, because you can do crazy things with it. Okay, so inheritance has some problems in S3, and the problem has to do with changing classes. So I'm going to go back to the toy example that he showed us in the first go to kind of explain what it is I'm meaning by this. So let's go back to our secret class. So our secret class is just going to be a secret class, and now let's make a super secret class whose class is super secret. And the super secret class has a different print method. This time I also want to hide the number of characters inside of each of these things, because maybe we could use that for some kind of guessing. Now we're going to say we're going to hide the number inside of it. So we make a new super secret exactly like this, x2, and now this will hide the number of things inside of each of these. So rather than seeing XX and X and 456 X's here, or 3 X's here, you just see 5 in each case. So it's super secret, super hidden. And we're going to make it an indexing method into secret. and it's going to call next method, creating a new secret. Just as we were doing before, we're going to be relying on the internal. We're using, not dispatching, what did he call it? Oh my gosh, the delegation. All right, so we're going to delegate using this next method function. However, when we do that, we have created again, if we try to use new SuperSecret and index in, we end up creating again a new secret object, which is not what we want to do. And Hadley says in the book that as far as he could tell, there's no way to do this in base R. So what he recommends we do is go back to the vectors package and use a function called vec_restore. And so now basically to say that whenever I use a indexing method on a secret, also maintain the subclass of secret, we add vectors, vec_restore, next method x, x1 to 3. We'll maintain x2 as both a secret and a SuperSecret, and return to us the SuperSecret class, and then print correctly the hidden numbers. And I think, yeah, that is kind of the end of the chapter where I stopped. He gets into some more complicated stuff with S3 that I didn't feel was necessary.
Yeah,
You also wrote it. It's not you're unfamiliar with S3, right?
he even advised to skip it if you are new to S3.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of stopped after, yeah, I guess it's dispatch details.
This chapter is weak. It's difficult.
I feel it's so random when you use this next method. How do you know that this really does what you wanted to do then? Because it feels like you just say something like I don't
yeah.
know.
I mean, what is the help function for this? Okay.
I didn't check it out.
Yeah. Next method. Class methods. R possesses a simple generic function mechanism which can be reused for method of the first argument. The next method should not be called except in methods called by use method or from internal generics. Now from some obscure details that need to appear somewhere.
Hmm. Yeah, maybe I should just read all this, the whole help file. But it sounds still very complicated.
I think he also says this at one point, doesn't he? That it uses deep magic.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't need to pass it. No, it's use method. Okay. Oh yeah, this is how to, when we talked about creating new generics, use method uses deep magic.
But it's the same, it's in the same help file, right? So it's like one.
Yeah. So
it also, I don't have to understand it, okay. If it's magic, I believe it.
So do we want to go through any of the, I admit I didn't go through any of the date stuff because I never use dates in my own work.
I have to check if I did any of the exercises actually.
Yeah, so they were both like date ones. I was like, this is gonna come to bite me in the butt one day. I'm gonna start using dates in my next project.
Yeah, this first, was it the first exercise? Yeah, the first exercise. He said it was categorize the objects returned by blah, 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 into the styles described above.
Oh yeah, up here, these object styles.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of skipped the object styles bit. So
I got like there's the vector style, and then there's
a data framey style and then a scalar style, which is
like was the scalar style, but
yeah.
I didn't quite get what's the meaning behind it, like why, how do what I needed for and I also, yeah, I don't know. It was a bit weird.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I think it's just, so it seems to me that S3 is so very flexible, and he's letting us know that there's different ways to construct S3 objects, because we're gonna interact with S3 objects that are being arranged in different ways in the wild, probably, as there's no rules for it. And just letting you know, some people might organize it like this, some people might organize it like this. And if you are building your own S3 object, here are the options you have for ways you could think about building your S3 object.
Okay, yeah.
I think this is what this whole kind of section is about.
Yeah.
For me.
So just, it's not like one style and everything looks like that, but you have multiple options and possibilities. Yeah, okay.
That's what I think he's trying to tell us. I was trying to dig into like any of the objects that I'm using in a day-to-day basis, but I think a lot of them are S4. So I was like, oh, cool, I can learn something. I'm like, oh no, these objects are much more complicated.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so do you want to go through this one? This might be interesting.
What do you expect? I didn't do that.
What does it actually return? Why? Okay, so this first bit I would have assumed is it's creating a generic called generic2. And then
it's a method, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
It's use method generic2. Is this not how you create a generic? Use method.
Okay, yeah.
New generic.
Yeah.
So creating your own generic, use method back to my generic, and then okay. Exercises. And then we'd think that it's got a function which it's going to call on any A1 object, which is supposed to print A1, A2, which is just going to print the word A2, beneath B, which is going to create a class X A1.
Do some magic.
Okay, so wow.
Generic.
My guess is it would have printed let's see, with B, it would have created an object.
It would have given A1 as the class to
object to X, and then it would have called next method, which then would have called A1, and then printed A2. That would be my guess. Should we see what it does?
Or would it print A1 then if it's calling A1?
So let's see, generic class A1 and then next method. Okay, so generic 2 just printed A2. Okay, let's say structure of one class equals B, and then generic 2. No method to invoke.
Because you passed the structure. Or...
Class attribute class B. Loop dispatch generic 2. Actually, can we just do that?
So A1 was not an option at all.
A1?
In the method dispatch now, there A1
Oh, yeah.
is not an option at all.
So let's see, structure 1 class. So if we call class 2, it calls A2. If we call, which we saw there, call A1, it calls A1. And if we do B, it just calls B. And then doesn't go down to the next method.
So before it called B, so when you...
So does it...
What does it mean again if you have only the small arrow or the big arrow? It means that
So the small arrow was when it was delegating?
Yeah.
Delegating.
Yeah.
So this is what we...
So it's delegating from A2 to B.
So for this object... Oh, this is an object with 2 classes, right? Subclass B, primary class A.
Yeah.
So it first tries to do B method and delegates to A2 because does next method here call to its class here?
That could be, yeah.
Okay, what if we do, and it doesn't skip. What if we do this? Call for class A1 at all. So here I just commented out next method. Class B.
Class B. What do you say, classes?
So is it returning anything here when it's assigning X back to being the A1 class?
I don't think so. Because it's just generating the...
It's just iterating and going to the next method right away. Okay, so both of those call A2. Those look exactly the same. Whether or not we remove this call to class X equals A1.
So is it that because you have this next method, it anyways just goes to the next method, and thereby everything else that's in there is just
Let's try.
not influencing anything?
Yeah, maybe. Let's see. Okay, so both things are happening.
What would be the class in the end of the object that we generate? So if we have this class is A1, if we would have that in there.
No class at all. Oh wait, no, that's because I did that. So the generic for A1 did never get called. Then our attributes for output is nothing.
And the class? Should we get that with attributes?
We should, yeah. So if I call class on my, hey boy, I wonder if it's this X is like, because we're inside the function call, and so it's an ethereal X that doesn't get
but
subset.
can you call
that
class on the output?
So, oh yeah, class character. Does this work if I superset?
Because we have the printed in there now.
I get it. I'm gonna Google the solutions. I'm gonna see if the like wisdom of the crowds has made it clear for us. S3. This is inheritance, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. When we execute the code above, this is what's happening. We pass an object of class B and A2 to generic 2. We get that, which prompts R to look for the method generic 2b. Yep. The method generic 2b then changes class to A1 and calls the next method. One would think that this will lead R to call generic A1, but in fact, as mentioned in the textbook, next method doesn't actually work with the class attribute of the object, but instead uses a special global variable .class to keep track of which method to call next. This is why generic A2 is called instead. I missed that.
Okay. So the special global variable
called .class to keep track of which method to call.
Okay.
Okay. So R6 is up next. I don't know how you feel about splitting it into 2 again. I would be super happy to, personally, as there's also like a lot of exercises in it. So I was trying to see maybe a natural break is like maybe just 4.2 and 4.1, and then we go through all the exercises next week. And then after that, I think 4.3 and 4.4 are shorter. I don't know. How do you feel?
Yeah, looks good.
Cool.
Yay. Never heard of R6.
R6 is the one that looks like every other object-oriented programming language, and it's the one that's built on top of environments. And I only know that because I did environments, the presentation for it, and I was like, what the heck is R6? So then I had to go read about R6 back then, and then I was like, oh, this makes sense. Okay.
Okay. Was Megan gonna present, or?
Let's double check with her if she's still okay to do it.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, I'd be happy to move to Mondays. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah, for me, it really doesn't matter. I'm also fine with Mondays.
Ooh, okay, I'll put it out then.